Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways, Coyote in the Highlands. I'm hiding from the wind again. Afternoon wind storm. I'm kind of in the outdoor kitchen. It's all bundled up. Let's see what happens. There's a guy on Twitter who's written a very interesting thread. He's actually got like 7 or 8 threads on this, but the first little bit of this one really pokes at me, and I want to talk about it just a little bit. He's going by QC. I'm not going to go ahead and out him. I'm not going to give you his @. Although if he wants to be mentioned and he sees this, that's totally fine. I'm not trying to hide who he is either. I just, privacy. He's put it out there in public on Twitter, but I'm using another platform, so we'll go ahead and go with the privacy. Okay, there's a certain kind of following the TAO philosophy that I think I know a lot of people who hold implicitly in some form, which I think, if taken sufficiently seriously, suggests the bizarre conclusion that literally everything follows the TAO automatically except humans. Let me redo that again because it works better as text and then it does as speech. There's a certain kind of following the TAO philosophy that QC thinks he knows a lot of people hold implicitly, like following the TAO is great. But it comes to this bizarre conclusion that the TAO is everything except humans, human action specifically. So everything follows the TAO except humans. So he goes on, compared to the rest of the universe where these alien eldritch entities invading the harmony of the TAO and the only thing capable of disharmony. It's weird, depressing, and confusing point of view. Okay. Maybe. He suggests that this turns into the idea of original sin if you keep poking at it. The alternative, which is bizarre in a different way, he says, is that everything follows the TAO automatically, including humans, and that all of the indignities and suffering and horrors of civilization and so forth is still somehow harmonious, which he says is distressing if true. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different perspective. I don't see the TAO as something quite that separate. And now he has much firmer grounding in Taoism than I do. Okay, I am a rank amateur. I've read the stuff a little bit. I haven't spent like a lifetime studying the words to find the dogmas and all of that. I'm just experiencing stuff here. One thing to remember is that in a lot of creation myths, it is the trickster deity who makes man. It's the trickster. Coyote makes man, Odin made man. And for all of you out there who might be Asatru or some other knows something about Norse mythology, Loki is not one of the Aesir. He is not one of the high elves, the family of gods, the family of deities. He is not. He is a giant different group of different race, different species, different everything. And while he's there, present at times, he's not part of the Aesir. He's not part of that thing. Okay, if you want to talk about a trickster deity, it is really literally Odin, who is also the chief of the pantheon, because that's just how things sometimes work. And there's that. So the trickster makes man and blows into man's body, soul, whatever, that ability to be, disharmonious. And I don't think that's the right phrase, though. Disharmonious. That's definitely part of it. That's a result of creativity gone wrong, so to speak. Okay? Now, there's also the simple fact that you don't get growth without stress. There has to be some disharmony, if we're going to use that phrase, in order to have growth and change. If everything is just perfect, then you have stasis. And stasis always dies. Entropy's a bitch. So there's that to think about. All right. Now, when you're talking about the TAO, it would be reasonable to extend your thoughts of the TAO to a conscious universe. And if you have a conscious universe, then our consciousnesses are part of that big consciousness. Okay, and that's one of the paradoxes that I have fun with. It used to bug me immensely, but now I just accept it. It's great. I am part of the whole total universe consciousness, universal consciousness, and I'm an individuated consciousness. And that's fine. It's totally fine to be both, even if it's impossible and paradoxical, because we are nothing if not a paradox. Humans, in general, are a paradox. So, if you think of the Tao as a total system, a conscious universe, everything interconnected, everything is part, then of course humans are part of that. And these various effects of human games and human creativity are part of that. And if that's miserable if you're attached to that. That's the thing here. It's miserable and, what does he say? Distressing. If that's true, only if you have an attachment to that, to the outcomes, to a specific side, and not to the Tao. If the Tao as a whole is what you're working on, whatever, attached to, I guess, experiencing, then you don't get distressed. Right? Makes sense. So there is another way of looking at this, and this brings the Tao into something very small and mean. Not mean as in evil, but mean as in just small, lower, lesser. Okay, and that is to assume that the natural flow of nature without any conscious input is the Tao. And that the consciousness, human consciousness, and that change and disharmony and everything is outside of that Tao. And that's, well, the Tao that you can describe is not the Tao. So there's that, right? So that's literally the very first thing about Taoism. The Tao that can be described is not the Tao. So if you're trying to describe the Tao as something that limited, I don't think you're talking about the Tao. I think you're talking about a perception of a set of programs. A perception of a set of programs in the universe that we've created, the consciousness, whatever, us, have created. God has created, if that's the way you want to phrase it. That kind of run without our attention, but that doesn't mean that we aren't responsible for creating and impacting that. Excuse me for one moment. That's better. So yeah, if I edited, I would edit that out. So I don't think this is really distressing. Did we evolve to disharmonize? I think that we evolved to be creative. I think this notion of disharmony from the beginning is somewhat backwards or somewhat unaccepting, okay? When there are disharmonies, when there are negative effects and all of that, that is because our creation, our creative impulse, our action is more or less imperfect. That's the best way to go about describing that, I think. What we have done has side effects, unintended consequences. And we learn through that. And sometimes those unintended consequences look disharmonious from one point of view, but then they don't from another point of view. So this idea of disharmony, I think it's more important to look at it from a side of creativity. We are creative beings. That is probably one of the biggest things that we're going to have to deal with as we get to artificial intelligence and general purpose intelligence and figuring out consciousness, is that we are creative spontaneously. We are creative without programming. We are creative in a very odd and godlike fashion. Let me just put it out there. It might sound like heresy to you, but we are creative in a godlike fashion. That's, there was a conversation I had recently about transactional nature of human behavior and how the transactional nature of behavior is something we learn. That's my opinion. It's something that we learn, and it's not innate to the state of being human. It's sort of like an epigenetic effect, but it's more of an epimemetic effect. Okay, it comes out, we learn to be transactional. And one of the best examples is that, there's a story every parent has of a toddler with a pet. If your 2-year-old has a lollipop and puts it in the dog's mouth and lets the dog lick it and then takes it back, and that's just pure sharing. There's no transactional basis for that, okay? And if you go through that a little bit, what you're doing is it's a spontaneous creation of something. It's a spontaneous joy in sharing. It's a spontaneous, it's a creation of a situation. And it's very, very important to wrap your head around that in this conversation, in my opinion. Because it changes things, right? Disharmony is a consequence, a side effect, a unintended consequence, maybe it's an intended consequence. Maybe you want to hurt people or want to cause chaos, whatever. But it's a consequence, not a nature. It's a consequence of action. I think that the proper way to look at this is that our nature is creative. And you can create things in different fashions. Different ways for this to work. There was that Harry Potter movie where they talked about the guy. Who's the bad guy? Voldemort? Voldemort, yeah. And they're doing he's in the wand shop, and it's like, Voldemort, oh yes, he did. The only one other person could have this wand. They had one mate, and it was Voldemort. He did great things, terrible things, but great things. And I'm like, things can be terrible and great at the same time. That's kind of an interesting line, because I don't think people really, really focus on that. Here I sound like someone using silly movies as an example. But the depth of creation may not necessarily be tied to the social benefit or your interpretation of a benefit of the creation. But we are creative. And that's my answer to this big Taoist think fest, which is many threads. Like, it's going to take me an hour and a half to get through all of this. I'm just reading the surface thread. He's referencing previous threads that he's written and that other people have written, and it's a very long and involved conversation. I don't think we're alien eldritch entities invading the harmony of the Tao. I think that we are creative, and that harmony, that was a piece of wood, has more to do with outcomes of creation than a nature. That's all I got for you. So follow the Tao, lead the Tao, be the Tao, create the Tao, and stay sideways.